Estás viendo Canal América, televisión dominicana para el mundo.
Sometimes life can be so damn hard. You don't know where to go. Everything keeps falling apart. Yeah. You try to do your best, but only God knows that you've given everything you've got, but the world takes you down. You just keep moving on. Let your fears.
Welcome to A Time for Truth show. I'm your host, Dr. Bernard Fialkoff, and it's a pleasure to have you back. And so I want to address a common request that I've had is, how do I become a viewer or subscriber? Very simple. Go on YouTube, click on A Time for Truth show, and there find the subscribe button, and you'll be availed of all the previous segments and episodes. We'd love to have you be part of our subscribers, part of our team. So tonight, we're going to talk about something that's very important, and it's really been increasing dramatically with a lot of detriment and a lot of peril that wasn't originally really known. And what are we talking about? We're talking about e-cigarettes, electronic cigarettes, vaping. And originally, vaping was going to be the solution. It was a way of eliminating cigarette smoking, which obviously we wanted to do. We wanted to reduce it or eliminate it, avoid it, and we wanted to do something that would be solving the situation. And so that's how electronic cigarettes and vaping began. And it seemed pretty much innocuous, flavorings, satisfying a necessity that some people had with the smoking, so that they could be satiated. And but there are many important scientific facts that have come out, findings that we will elucidate on this show. And engineer, if you can put up the slides on the screen, and we will begin this presentation. What I've done is I've taken some slides out from presentations that I give to health practitioners, physicians, dental practitioners, and we call it the truth about vaping, CBD, medical and recreational marijuana, and opioids. But tonight on this segment, we're going to just restrict it to vaping. We won't get into any other factors, because by itself, I think by the time you reach the end of the show, you will be dramatically alarmed or woken up to what's really happening with vaping. So Buddha, if we go to the next slide, and we'll begin our presentation with the slides. And something important to know is, with this crisis that we have in the country, is that in 2021, 107,000 Americans died from drug abuse. Now, what does that figure mean? Well, when you know that in an entire 10-year Vietnam War, we lost a little less than 60,000 Americans, and you take 107,000 in 1 year from drugs, if you were to multiply that by 10 to equal the 10-year Vietnam War, you would have about 1,070,000 deaths that would have occurred from drugs. Way too high. Undeclared epidemic, pandemic, however you want to label it. Let's go to the next slide. So, let's first start out with the fact that smoking by itself causes 480,000 American deaths a year. 480,000. We're obviously alarmed with COVID, but COVID in the last 2 years has been horrific, was about 387,000. So here we have something that we really don't hear that much about anymore. It's caused 100,000 more deaths in the country, and it's affecting so many other people with heart disease, pulmonary diseases, other maladies, respiratory problems. And here we look at this and we say, well, then we have the vaping. And so why did I want to bring out this fact of the smoking? Is that an interesting fact, which is not that positive, is that's an unfortunate fact, is that when people vape, they're much more likely to end up on cigarettes. So here we have the solution actually leading to the original problem and increasing it more. So vaping now is known to give a predisposition to smoking. And we can already see how many deaths are occurring in the country from smoking alone. Another very important fact is how quickly the vaping has spread. And if you look at the bottom of the screen, you will see that in a few short years, the incidence increased about 80%. 80%. Tremendous increase in vaping. Let's go to the next slide. These are all, by the way, figures from the CDC. Everything I'm going to be presenting to you in this show are not my opinions or philosophies, but actually facts from the CDC and other scientific journals or agencies. Now, I think most of you know that I'm a 40-year New York City periodontal dental implant surgeon. So first, let's just take a look at what happens in the mouth, intraorally. And what happens is, let's just take a look at the liquid that's in the vaping. The liquid by itself is at times called propylene glycol. Some of you are probably saying, but that's antifreeze, Dr. Fialkoff. That's correct. So propylene glycol, which is also antifreeze, is one of the liquid medias that's utilized to carry these flavorings. What the problem is with that, aside from obvious problems of what you're imbibing, is that it turns into acids. And acids cause tooth decay. So here now you're vaping, and what's happening is you're increasing your predisposition to having decay, caries, and having to see your dentist much more frequently. The other problem with the propylene glycol media is that it binds to the water within your mouth, to the saliva, okay? The saliva which lubricates your mouth. And so it dries your mouth. And when it dries your mouth, which is called scientifically xerostomia, this xerostomia or dry mouth leads to more adhesion of the bacteria within your mouth. Why is that? Well, because the saliva that comes out actually has antibodies. Saliva has different antibodies, has different cells that actually keep your mouth healthy. But now we're decreasing those, and what's happening, we're creating a dry environment, which is not a healthy environment, and which leads to plaque or bacteria accumulation. The bacteria accumulation leads to gum problems. You get irritation, you get inflammation, and lo and behold, you get the upper picture that you see on the screen. Not very pleasing. You see there's recession throughout that person's mouth. Obviously the teeth are very dark, and you see that there's decay. Darkness is tooth decay. And what happens is now this person who thought they were just doing something innocuous has gum disease, has tooth decay, and has a habit. We'll get into that more as we go along in this talk. Now, sometimes instead of propylene glycol. The other media that's used is a glycerin, a vegetable glycerin. Now, this vegetable glycerin causes more adhesion of the bacteria to the teeth and to the gum tissues. So these adhesions cause more growth of the bacteria, and again, leads to a predisposition where now you have bacteria growing more readily than you would have had if you didn't have this vegetable glycerin in the vaping liquid. Now realize that we haven't even talked about anything else. None of the flavorings, the nicotine, none of the other metals that we're going to get into now. Next slide, engineer. Now, vaping, unfortunately, with the flavorings, because the flavorings are called chemically diacetyl, and a flavoring called diacetyl, which is a flavoring that was found in Blockbuster. When you went to go get a video, you also got the butter flavored popcorn. And so what happens is the way this was realized it was coming from was this disease of the lung called popcorn lung, is that the original incidence of this happened in the factory workers who were making the butter flavored popcorn that we were buying, and Blockbuster Video and other areas too, not just Blockbuster, but in general. Not to pick on them, it was just being used in general. And those flavorings were in the aerosol, in the ambient air of the factories, and those workers were developing lung diseases, which is called constrictive bronchiolitis obliterans, which in lay terms is popcorn lung. What this chemical was doing was actually destroying the passages within the lung and the cells within the lung, so that person was having difficulty breathing and developing serious problems. And so what happened is now with the vaping and these same flavorings, the problem was exacerbated. Why do you say exacerbated, Dr. Fialko? Well, it wasn't just in the ambient air. Obviously, we were taking that into a vape. So now they weren't breathing the air where it was diluted, but they were actually breathing a vaping apparatus which heated the compound, made it more concentrated, and then it was taken directly into the lungs, causing what we now know throughout the country as popcorn lung. Horrific to think that this is something that's out on the market and was not controlled, was not studied. Really, as a doctor, we really have to realize that we need to do controlled studies. We can't just take things at face value. We can't just take marketing. Our marketing has outpaced our scientific studies and has put them almost on the back burner. It almost seems like marketing and sales have become the reason we do things rather than whether they're healthy for us, going to make a good life and lead to long-term future for the person, for the family, for the community. Because obviously we don't want people getting sick, especially when you think about COVID being a respiratory disease. And now here we have something going on across the entire country causing respiratory problems. And here we're worried about ways of containing it. And really, for some reason, this has never come out. And obviously the effects don't even need to be reviewed. I know you're with me. Let's go to the next slide. Now, let's talk about some things that you're going to find in your vaping, in your e-cigarette. We've talked about the flavorings. We talked about the diacetyl, the butter flavor that had caused the popcorn lung. There's also cinnamon flavor, which is another chemical, cinnamaldehyde, and the cherry flavors, which are the benzaldehyde. All these are chemicals that are toxic to you. They're flavorings, yes, but they're not innocuous. Now, in order to vape, obviously, you have to have a heating element. We have to get heat somewhere. So that heating element is the metal. And I don't know how many of you have ever wondered where the metal comes from, or where these vapes are manufactured in mass, and where is their site of production? Well, the site of production of many of these vapes actually is China, and the metals that they use in the vapes are not as regulated as they would be here in the United States, where we have very strict regulations. And so what happens is these vapes, who have been manufactured, actually expose the person to tin, nickel, to lead, to arsenic, all these things that if you research online, you will see are very toxic to you, toxic metals. And you can, if you research a little bit further, you'll see that this is the heating element that's actually heating your flavoring. So now we have the flavoring causing disease, and we have the heating element itself now also having toxic chemicals, toxic metals, which is also now going directly into your lungs. Horrific. I want to pause for a second just to emphasize the malady that we really have here. Now, let's go further. Now, we have to talk about nicotine, because we've talked about the toxicity, cancer-causing chemicals. Let's talk about nicotine. Well, many people have told me, well, but you know what, it's not so horrible. The flavorings don't have nicotine. Nicotine, you know, is what was very addictive in cigarettes. So we were going to make the vapes without nicotine, something positive. Well, one day before I went in to give a presentation at a local high school, I saw one of these vape stores. So I decided, let me go in and check this out for myself. Let me see what is in the flavorings. And, you know, it's very aesthetic. They're very nice colors of these different vapes, these different apparatus which heat the different substances. Some are called dab rigs, not oil rig, with dab rigs, which is used for marijuana. And they have all different colors. There's different vaping pipes, all different innovations. And so I looked for the bottle of flavoring. And on the bottle of flavoring, I took it, I looked at it, and said, nicotine free. I said, very interesting. I was with a friend of mine. So I looked at the ingredients. And I know you're going to find this hard to believe. I did also, and so did my friend when I showed him. The first ingredient on the nicotine bottle, nicotine-free bottle, was nicotine. I said, no, that must be a mistake. And I went to get a different bottle from a different manufacturer. So I got a different bottle of a flavoring that was also nicotine-free, brought it up, turned it, look at the ingredients. Nicotine-free. And the first ingredient, I know you guessed it, nicotine. Now, what's the problem with nicotine? Nicotine is very addictive because what happens is when you smoke it, vape it, or however, but vaping puts it directly into your lungs, right into your system, it goes to your brain. And when it hits the brain, it hits dopamine receptors, which are pleasure centers. Now, everyone has pleasure centers that are normally when we get married, when we have our first dates, when we get, you know, a basket, we hit a home run, you know, we did a great song, we danced something unbelievable, and everybody was so impressed. All these different activities naturally excite you, enthuse you, and you put out dopamine naturally, but it's natural. It's, you know, sensation that's pleasurable because you're doing pro-survival activity. Problem with vaping is now you're vaping it directly, and now the body sees all this nicotine and you're getting dopamine release, and there was really no reason for it. And so the body starts getting used to it, as many people who have allergies know that you get used to your antihistamines, they don't work so well. So you go back to your ear, nose, and throat, he gives you a different antihistamine, and maybe that doesn't work so well after a while. And you keep switching antihistamines because after a while, the body keeps adapting. Well, the same thing happens with nicotine. And so what happens is the body adapts to this external nicotine stimulation. It's now no longer the normal, pleasurable, pro-survival activity stimulating your system. No, now it's artificial. And so what happens is your body starts shutting down its own normal responses, what's called physiologic, normal response. Something pleasurable would give a normal response. But now it is depending on this external nicotine to release dopamine. And when it doesn't have it, what happens? You get craving, you get sad, you get mood swings, you get upset, and you're not yourself anymore, but now you're addicted. And the problem is this addiction doesn't go away. In fact, in youth, the nicotine causes changes in the brain, but not temporarily, because even though they stop, it's permanent. Let's go to the next slide. Now here you see from the New England Journal of Medicine that when people vape, they're much more likely to binge drink. When people vape, they're more likely to have marijuana. When people vape, they're more likely to use other drugs or alcohol or promiscuity. And so what's happening is this vaping, and if you put together everything that I've given you so far, you can see that the vaping, because it does contain nicotine, the person's behavior is being altered, they're being addicted, and they're seeking a high. So if you just look at that, it makes sense. So they're seeking that high, and so they're getting it in alternate means. The important thing is now that they're actually the effect of that. They're no longer in control of their lives. Now they become the effect of all of this, and under the effect of this addiction that they have, that they may never even realize when they started just vaping something for flavoring, because all their friends were doing it. Next slide. Remember, this is a New England Journal of Medicine. CDC was the previous quoting that I gave you. All these are scientific studies, not opinions, not philosophies. So you may be wondering, well, how can that be, Dr. Fialkoff? Because if I go online, I don't see that, or I see all the wonderful things. That's a question I'm going to let you answer yourself. You have to find out for yourself. Most important is for you to see what's going on. Now, the truth about vaping is what I was explaining to you, is that unfortunately, when a young person starts to vape, they will be addicted to that nicotine, and that nicotine will actually alter their normal brain development, because brain development occurs during youth. But when you have nicotine, now that normal brain development no longer occurs. But even worse, it's not reversible, because it's something that didn't occur, it didn't develop normally, and now it's beyond that period where that person would normally form and organize their brain in a certain way, which has been developed over so many eons, and they've altered that chemically, artificially. So now they no longer will have that for the rest of their lives. And now we have them addicted, and now we have them using flavorings which are toxic to them, which affect their lungs, with heating elements that give toxic chemicals. And we haven't even gone into marijuana. Because what does a vape do? A vape carries different chemicals. And obviously, I'm sure you realize that you can put marijuana into a vape and get very high levels. And now, on top of everything as I've told you, you have the marijuana. And the marijuana, when it's at a high level of a vape, which is 40 or 50% concentrated, according to the CDC again, is very highly addictive. So it's horrific circumstances when we put these all together. Next slide. Engineer, please. Okay, and there you see the title again. And so I wanted to put the last slide on for you, because you can see how the vaping becomes a gateway. Because the person, knowingly or unknowingly, goes down a track, gets addicted. Hopefully they don't get disease. Hopefully they don't get any of the toxicity from the heavy metals. Hopefully they buy a vape that somehow doesn't have this and avoids that. But the reality is that it goes on to very high levels of marijuana, which have been shown by the CDC and other scientific studies to be addicting. And then once they get addicted to that, and that's not enough anymore, you can see the sequence of the opioids and the different medications, and so it explains to you why in our society so much is happening. So I hope this has been informative to you. I hope when you look at the fact and you're trying to see, well, how can we decrease the violence in our subways or the violence in our cities that happened in Philadelphia during July 4th? Or we're looking at how to decrease bigotry and prejudice. We have to take a look at the fact that we need to be ourselves. In order to be ourselves, we have to be lucid. We have to realize what's right and what's wrong. And being on a chemical, being on a drug, stimulating ourselves artificially and making ourselves the effect of all of this does not forebode well. Find out for yourself. You will see that what I presented today is true. And may you lead a happy life, have beautiful events, and experience great sensations that come naturally from positive experiences. Thank you so much for being our viewer. I hope this was beneficial to you, and we'll see you on the next episode of A Time for Truth show. Good night.
Sometimes life can be so damn hard. You don't know where to go. Everything keeps falling apart. Yeah. You try to do your best, but only God knows that you've given everything you've got, but the world takes you down. You just keep moving on. Let your feet